And with me today, I have the beautiful Lorilee Binstock, who is a trauma survivor turned thriver, whose mission is to inspire and empower others on their healing journeys. As the host of a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast, Lorilee creates a safe space for survivors to share their stories and explore pathways to recovery. In addition to her impactful podcast, she serves as the executive film producer of Our Own Personal Realities and the editor-in-chief of Authentic Insider magazine, a platform that amplifies voices and stories that matter the most. Welcome to the show, Lorilee. I
Oh,
absolutely love the impact you're making.
oh my gosh, I'm so honored to be invited. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Oh, the honor's all mine. So, no, thank you so much for your time today. I mean, it'll be great for you to, introduce yourself and your personal journey with my listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I'm a trauma survivor thriver, and I have a podcast. And the podcast really started after my own personal healing journey. I'm a childhood sexual abuse survivor, and I was abused by my father. And so, as you could understand, it was very traumatic and very shameful to even at the time, in the early 90s, I didn't know this was like a thing. Like I thought I was the only one. This was just, I couldn't talk about this to anybody. I couldn't tell. Obviously, I was groomed not to, but it was a very scary time where I didn't, it was just really, really hard. And I became suicidal. Eventually, I became very angry. And, in my years of therapy that I've done recently, I discovered my anger came from, different parts. Did internal family systems therapy where we worked with, I don't know if you've seen the movie Inside Out, but it's like parts work. So my anger part of me came out when um, one day I said enough is enough, and I just lost it. I just started throwing and crying and throwing things and just really had a tantrum because I just wanted my father to leave. And he did. And not only did he like leave my room, he left the country and he was gone for several years, which was a relief to me, but I developed so many, obviously, abandonment issues and anger issues, and I became suicidal at a very early age at 13. And so, I kind of buried that and, pretended it didn't happen. As most people do, they block the trauma away. And so once I was in high school, college, um, it started coming out more. Like these symptoms of PTSD that I didn't know were PTSD. So eventually, I got to work in the real world. I was a morning show anchor and producer and host. And I had a meltdown. Luckily, it wasn't on live TV, but I had a meltdown where I was taken to the hospital, and I had to get. I was in a psych ward. They diagnosed me bipolar because back then PTSD was really a diagnosis reserved for soldiers. That was just not something they did. So I was taking medication for about 10 years, and then just recently in 2020, I had another suicide attempt where at that point I told my husband, I think this is what's happening with me. I think I told him that I was abused by my father, and while my husband was shocked, he wasn't surprised. So once I went and we decided I was going to go into treatment, I went to treatment for 31 days. This was when COVID was happening, but I didn't know the world shut down because they take your phone and they don't really talk to you about the news. And so I came out. In treatment, I learned about all these different trauma um, modalities to help with trauma and PTSD, which I didn't know existed, and I felt this was necessary. They told me I was misdiagnosed bipolar and that it was PTSD, and so there I started my journey. But prior I was in therapy for like 15, 20 years. But it wasn't until I actually started doing like trauma therapy where things started actually changing and evolving, and this is where I am now.
Wow, what a journey. And so how long did it take you to actually acknowledge and accept what happened to you?
Oh my gosh, like 20 something years. I didn't I it was because I was working. I did some freelancing for this doctor. I booked him on radio and television, and in what the reason why I was his he had a book, and his story was that he was sexually abused by an uncle, and he talked about PTSD and all of these symptoms, and I was like, what? These are all of my symptoms. And so then I started backtracking and then really thinking about what had happened to me. And honestly, I was just not prepared. It all came like screaming back at me, it felt like, and I didn't, and so that I think that's why I started becoming more suicidal, but still not talking about what had happened to me because I didn't know. That was I mean, at that point, I was like 34 years old when the doctor started talking, when I was, listening to his story, and it felt very similar to mine. And I was too scared to talk about it though.
Yeah. Oh my God, yes, similar to my age that was actually. So that's quite interesting.
Oh, really? Yes. Wow.
3 decades, yeah. And apparently, I did read it as well that they said, it takes on average 3 decades for somebody to actually understand what happened to them. So it's
Wow.
all that trauma that you're carrying all that time. God, yeah.
Yeah. And
So,
I think we're the lucky ones because I've spoken to people who aren't
yeah,
getting better until their 60s, and
so true.
but it's never too late to heal.
Exactly, yeah. And some people, yeah, they just live their whole lives, not even understanding what happened to them. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's phenomenal, isn't it? And so what do you think were the symptoms for you during your kind of 20s and then early 30s? So what kind of symptoms were you experiencing?
Well, I've always been good at keeping it together, like
Mm,
always looking like I've got it together, and doing way a lot more than I should, right? I still have a problem with that, and as I was talking to you earlier, I have a problem with promoting myself.
mm,
I have a problem with putting myself out there. I think, having my podcast, Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast, is a little easier because I get to share other people's stories. It's a little difficult for me to share my story, not because I'm ashamed of it, but there's a little bit of me that says, am I good enough? And
mm,
that kind of drove a lot of the issues. Like, am I good enough for this? Or am I good enough for this job? Or am I good enough for this partner?
mm,
And then you start self-sabotaging. I did a lot of self-sabotage. I did, it just, the confidence was, you know, at the bottom of the barrel. Like it was terrible. I still am working. I have a lot of work to do when it comes to that area. But I would have outbursts once I kept trying to keep up this facade of I've got it together. Then there would be a point where I would have this ridiculous outburst and someone would be like, what just happened? And then obviously I became suicidal and I've had multiple suicide attempts in my life. And I feel very fortunate that, they didn't go through, but um, I think that was the biggest one. It was just the self-hate I had for myself. And that really drove a lot of my behaviors and really to my self-destruction, which eventually was what I needed to kind of get myself the help I actually needed versus like the help that you don't know about. I don't think a lot of people know about trauma therapy because a lot of people don't know they've experienced trauma when the majority of people I think do.
exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Everyone's had some trauma to some degree in their
Yeah.
childhood, and God, the amount of times that I have to keep sending out the messages, just do the work, just find out what happened to you because it just will explain so much in your life. you know.
Oh.
This is why, in the work that I do with clients, we do like a timeline and we look at the like the good events and the bad events from like a young age to now. I just think that's such an empowering thing to do as well.
Oh, that is busy. You know what? I did that in treatment. And it was it was this long timeline, multiple pages long, where I was like, I had to do it on the floor. It was like, oh my gosh, this
Yeah.
happened to me at this age. But that was so powerful. That is so powerful.
Yeah, you just start to understand patterns. But in terms of like, because I know you mentioned internal family systems as like
Mhm.
a form of therapy, what other kind of processes were there? And could you elaborate on that for my listeners who may not be aware of the parts?
Okay, yes, internal family systems therapy. I think that's extremely effective. If you've watched the kids movie Inside Out by Pixar, um, they talk about your individual parts, like your happy part, your sad part, your angry part. There's a root to where that was created, right? And so it's almost like hypnotherapy, where you kind of just you think about your part and the part that you feel like is coming out.
Mhm.
And for a good long time after when I started therapy, my anger part, I'd have road rage. That was another thing. I had road rage. And um I realized when I kind of took a step back and while my therapist was they were asking, she was asking me questions and I kind of was like in a meditative state, and I remembered a moment when my dad came into my room, and I was like, "This is not happening," and I started screaming and crying and throwing things, and then it was like, "This is the part. This is where it started. The the anger, that the explosive anger." And my therapist reminded me like that was my part that was protecting me. All these different parts, there's no bad parts, right? The bad parts are our protector parts. And so at that point when I realized that that's when my anger truly started, I began to understand that it was protecting me the whole time, because once that happened, my dad was gone. He didn't come back, and that never happened again. And it was and to understand that it wasn't a bad thing, then that kind of removes the shame. And shame is such a huge um a feeling that can really dictate a lot of things. And so that's kind of the idea of internal family systems, kind of understanding where shame comes from, anger comes from, and really, and when once you know where the root is, then you can understand that it wasn't my fault. It's like kind of reaching back into your inner child at the moment where there was that emotion that began, um, which led into psychedelic assisted therapy. And I don't know if you know a lot about psychedelic assisted therapy, but internal family systems therapy works pretty much hand in hand, because and that's why some people, when they're talking about psychedelics, is they are scared that they'll have a bad trip, which again, we don't want to talk about bad feelings or bad emotions, but they're challenging, right? They Because there are some people who like we talked about, don't know what happened to them. And the thing about psychedelics is it really dips into your subconscious, into all of the stuff that you've blocked away. And that's why people believe that there are bad trips out there. But they're just challenging. And I think the most important part is to sit with those challenging and difficult um, journeys. And then you can actually understand what is going on inside. And so it's really focused on your subconscious, and really, really looking at the trauma head on. And so that was what was transformative, right? The person I was working with internal family systems therapy, they really walked me through how psychedelics could really work with internal family systems therapy. Um and now I feel like I can really sit with the difficult things that are happening in my life and really understand, like, okay, so what happened here and what can I do? Finding solutions to problems. And the thing is, if you aren't aware of the issues that you're having, that are difficult, then you can't find solutions. So I think awareness is the number one thing. And so that has been dramatic for me. The psychedelic assisted therapy with the internal family systems therapy. And I did EMDR and, and I don't know if you know about the eye movement desensitization, as well as somatic experiencing. So I've tried them all. And it's been, and I, it's been life changing.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that. So, like with the psychedelic assisted therapy, it does, doesn't it? I think it awakens your whole consciousness and
Mhm.
you're able to see things that you wouldn't have previously. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Because even after all of that, what I mean, my healing journey I started with MDMA, and the reason why most people who have PTSD and they do this with veterans is the PTSD or the MDMA works well with PTSD because it lowers your fear response or your anxiety response, and so you're actually able to look at a situation that was extremely traumatic without being afraid of it. And so my first was experience was when my father actually in my head I saw him as a child, and it was then where I understood he was also abused. And so for so long in my life I said, you know, he's just he should have known better. He's an adult, but I realize he didn't know better. And while, forgiveness is a very like a difficult um I guess idea for a lot of people. And so when I say I forgave him, I don't mean that like okay, I'm like okay, everything's back to normal. It was I found compassion for him in that moment where I thought, okay, it wasn't my fault. And not saying that it wasn't his fault because it was, but he also didn't know any better. Um, and after I told my mother about what had happened, she was furious, but then after a while I think she understood like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to leave this person. She had been with him for so long. So there was a point where she was like, can you forget all of this happened so we can see our grandchildren? And I was like, absolutely not. And I was very angry with her for a very long time. And then I did another journey, another MDMA journey, and I specifically remember feeling this loss of my daughter, and it was so difficult. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm losing my child." And my therapist saw me wincing and was like, "Well, what happened? What's happening right now?" And I told her, I was like, I feel like I'm losing my daughter." And then she's like, "Well, what is that bringing up?" And then it made me realize that was my mom. It was my mom's feeling of losing me. And because in that moment, I was like, I don't want to feel this way. I'll do anything to not feel this way. And I realized that was my mom coping to tell me, like, I don't want to lose you. So can you forget that anything happened? That was her way of coping.
Yeah.
And I found some compassion for her there as well. And so, I hadn't talked to her for almost a year at that point. And then I realized, like, okay, it's not her fault, but I'm going to set my boundaries and say, I'm not going to bring the kids around you guys. Like, if you guys want to see them, my dad's not going to see them, but you can. And that's an effort on your part. And
Wow.
so,
Yeah. God, it sounds like, yeah, you've been through a lot. And I love that you mentioned about forgiveness because, yeah, forgiveness is about just, it's not about them, it's about ourselves.
right.
It's such an important part of the healing process. And did you find that once you were kind of able to do that, then I guess it's just like, weights lifted off you and you just feel,
Oh my goodness.
yeah, so much lighter.
Right. Yes, it's unbelievable how much stuff you don't realize you're carrying because you're carrying it for so long that it feels so normal. And it doesn't necessarily feel good, but once that weight is lifted, you're like,
Mm.
what is this? What is this? Why haven't I done this? And
Yeah.
that's another reason why I'm so encouraging I try to encourage people to start that journey.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's always good to kind of talk a bit about any setbacks that you might have gone through as well, any challenges that you had to overcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, healing is a three steps forward, two steps back journey, right? You're still but it's the little bit of forward movement. It's not a straight line. It's very much of, it it's work. And I can understand because even I got to a point where I was like, my healing's done. I can't heal. There's no way. I'm back to where I was. And that wasn't true. Even though I kept telling myself that, it wasn't true. Because then my therapist would remind me these little steps, these little milestones I'd make, I'd get to. And it was like, oh, I did get through that, which I know like a year ago I would not have been able to get through. And so then after a year, you're like, wow, that growth is significant. And then after 2 years, you're like, I don't even recognize that person from 2 years ago. So
Exactly.
it is very hard. Um, but anything worthwhile is not easy. So I think that's also something to keep in mind.
So true. Yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So I always say that as well, that for any kind of success that that we want to go through, any win, then there's always going to be some like resistance, something holding you back. But
Hmm.
then I feel like that's there for you to test you and for you to want that even more, you know. It,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
it's just you have to overcome it, and then yeah, you start to appreciate it more as well. You're so much more grateful when you get there.
Yes, and being grateful, practicing gratitude is also a wonderful tool in healing.
It is, yeah, yeah. Oh, fantastic. So let's talk about your work as a producer and editor. I just think it's
Yeah.
phenomenal, the work that you're doing. Yeah, if you want to talk about your projects, that'd be great.
Yes. Well, I do have the podcast, the Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast, like I said, was birthed from my own personal healing and modalities that I learned that I had no idea existed. And so on the Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast, I invite trauma survivors who are thriving and kind of what was their not secret, but what got them to start thriving. And there's so many different healing journeys, like I said, there's psychedelics, but there's also somatic experiencing, and there are all these different modalities that I've never even heard of. Some of them are indigenous and have been practiced for hundreds of years, that kind of died out. There's just so many different modalities. We talk about hypnotherapy, and it's we're like, oh, how is hypnotherapy? Because everyone thinks of someone being hypnotized, but
Mm,
um, it's way more than that. And so when I was learning about hypnotherapy and realized that, oh, like internal family systems is somewhat of a kind of a type of hypnotherapy, I
mm,
started opening my mind up a little bit more and being like, oh, this is very interesting. It's so fascinating learning about all these different modalities and how people have healed. And um and I think it's more than like CBT, like cognitive behavioral therapy. It's it's trauma therapy, all the different modalities that fall under trauma therapy. So I love sharing that because this is the podcast is definitely something that I wish I had when I was a young adult. If I knew that all of these things were happening to other people, I feel like I would have gotten help sooner.
mm,
Um, and and because the podcast, I only do about, I think, 25 episodes a season. I there I have wonderful people who reach out who want to share their story, and I want their stories to be heard, but for 25 episodes I don't really have as much space to do so. So I created Authentic Insider magazine where people can share their stories. And I have this wonderful graphics designer who really curates everyone's stories into these beautiful pages of artwork. It feels I'm just in awe of the work she does. So if you haven't checked out Authentic Insider, please check it out. There's amazing stories there, and a lot of resources that you can kind of turn to as well. And then our own personal realities. We are in the middle of raising money for to get to move through the proof of concept, which I'd be happy to share with you when we get off. But it's our own personal realities is based on my psychedelic assisted healing journey. I speak to veterans who unfortunately have to go because it is illegal in the States, have to go outside of the United States to um, get their healing done through ayahuasca or psilocybin, which are magic mushrooms. But the work that they're doing, it's hard for me because I'm like, you fight for this country, you go overseas and you come back and you have to go out of the country to get the healing from the trauma that we put you through. So that it's very powerful. I've spoken to an athlete who was a former um, UFC fighter, and he mixed martial arts fighter, and he's working with other people because the beautiful thing about psychedelics, minus in addition to the healing, it can really help with traumatic brain injuries and the physical injuries that football players or hockey players. I've actually interviewed a hockey player and fighters deal with because there's the traumatic brain injuries that they're doing research in several universities across the country and overseas on how actually repairs the brain. And so I speak to a UFC fighter who's working with other athletes to make sure that, they're in the work that they're doing in the sports that they're playing, that they're keeping their brain healthy. And so it's just, and then, obviously I share my own personal journey with psychedelics. So yes, so I'm happy to send you the links to all of that and yeah, to share that out with your people.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Yeah. And so how about now? So how do you maintain self-care then while working so closely with all these stories of trauma?
Well, honestly, it feels very healing because even though the people I speak to deal with trauma or have dealt with trauma, I'm hearing their ways of healing, right? I'm listening to their daily practices of gratitude, and it reminds me, oh, I should practice gratitude each day. But I do have my therapist, my internal family systems therapist, who I see every month, actually every other week. I think I see her today, actually. Um, and I do, make sure I have time with my friends. My husband and I work together to, share the load of the kids. Because, having children, especially if you're a healing parent, it's very challenging. They really, well, there's such a blessing in bringing out what it is that you need to work on yourself. Sometimes it's hard to look at it, right? So, my husband and I work together to 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 help with the kids, and so it gives me my time. I know that there's little things that I do here and there. If I'm feeling like there's stress in my neck, I'll get a massage or I feel very privileged to be able to do that and to be able to have a therapist and see a therapist as frequently as I would like. And I also do psychedelic journeys probably every 4 months.
Oh,
Um, yeah, so so that kind of resets me, right? It helps me get to a point where like the weight is lifted. It feels like it cleans out my system, like a computer that has needs to be restarted.
yeah.
It's that's definitely like the top thing that I would say is very healing for me and really keeps me
Right.
maintaining a some stability.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that. Yeah. I can imagine because we get bombarded with so much negativity, through the
Oh,
news and TV.
oh
And you're
gosh.
right. Yes, I just feel like having something like the psychedelic ceremony or just, even a retreat can really help to just get rid of all those negative thought patterns that might arise, during all this crazy time. And it's easy, isn't it? Because people are talking and, we absorb so much, don't we, from
Mm.
others. And so, yeah, you're right. I feel like we need something just to help to ground ourselves and to just reset the system. So just having that practice can really be beneficial. Mm,
Yes, it's one of the things I look forward to. And
yeah.
I do love taking on more challenges after that. It's because there's a point where I'm so overwhelmed where I'm like, I can't do anything right now. And then when I do a journey, it's like I can take on everything again because
I mean,
all
yeah,
of the other unnecessary stuff goes away.
that's fantastic. Oh my goodness. So inspiring. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And so what advice would you have for my listeners today, who may be going through a tough time right now?
Stay curious about yourself. I think that is the key. Awareness is everything, right? And I think there are a lot of people out there who have a hard time getting the help that they need because they're so comfortable in the space that they're in. Even though it's a very uncomfortable space, it's the space that they are very familiar with. And there's this quote, you'll always choose a familiar hell than a unfamiliar heaven, right? It's hard to want to change. And I think the awareness of just that um can really help spurt any type of growth, any post-traumatic growth that you may think, oh, is it worth it? What if it doesn't? What if I'm just nothing helps? It's always worth it to try.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, just taking that one step forward.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think
It's
that
the
that
hardest step,
is, isn't it?
that
Just yeah,
first one.
yeah. Because I guess it's just making that decision in the first place. Saying, right, I'm going to start now. I suppose for some people who aren't aware, it's like where to start as well. So yeah,
Right.
yeah. What would you suggest for that?
Well, that, like I said, if you stay curious and you kind of take a deep dive inward, um, I think our bodies know how to heal. It's a matter of understanding what has happened to us. Under like you talk about, maybe journaling is powerful. Doing a timeline like you do with your clients is powerful. Understanding patterns is powerful. And once you're aware of that, you can find the solutions to fix them. But it really just starts with the awareness like, okay, this doesn't feel good to me. Why does it not feel good to me?
Mm,
And really dig and sit with yourself and sit with the uncomfortable feelings of that. And then through that, answers will come. And obviously, doing work with you would be helpful because just that timeline, my therapist did that with me, and I could not believe the patterns I saw.
wow. It is powerful, isn't it? In that
Hmm.
awareness. Oh, I
The
love that.
awareness.
Thank you so much. So, where can my listeners find you?
Oh, yes. TraumaSurvivorThriver.com. I have an Instagram, which is Trauma Survivor Thriver. It's trauma underscore survivor underscore thriver. If you go to TraumaSurvivorThriver.com, you can actually find all my social media. You can find my YouTube. You can find the clip to the proof of concept for our own personal realities, the magazine, the podcast, it's all there. And so I hope you check it out and you find some healing and help there. And also you can reach out to me at Lori Lee. Um, you could DM me, but also you could shoot me an email, Lorilee at binstockmediagroup.com. So um, I don't know. Maybe it'll be in the show notes because I know, like I was saying, my name's not easy to get. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll be adding all the links to this description. So yeah, thank you so much.
thank you. I'm so grateful to you and the work that you're doing. It is powerful and we need more people like you.
Yeah, well, likewise. Oh, thank you for your time and your wisdom and knowledge. And listeners, I hope you enjoyed this show. And I'm sure Lorilee would love to hear from you. So please do get in touch and follow her on her socials. Again, I'll be adding in all the links to this episode. And if you have any questions about anything that we discussed today, we always love to hear from you. Drop us a note, drop us an email, and we look forward to hearing from you. Until next episode, take care and stay blessed, my friends.